thinking of a dividend off economic gains, off the gains from technology, is one of the main reasons to implement UBI. Technology has created the middle class, and now it's destroying it.
What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Ameer Approved. Today, we have an amazing guest, a good friend of mine, Floyd Marinescu. Now, before we get to that, a little bit house cleaning notes. Number one, if you haven't already subscribe to my channel. In fact, every single week, I'll be picking 1 to 2 lucky winners who are brand new subscribers. I'll be giving them $20 worth of Bitcoin. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, if you can leave a review, I will also be picking 1 to 2 lucky winners from the iTunes review to give them $20 in Bitcoins. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to my buddy Floyd. So, Floyd Marinescu is a CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software, development news, and learning events service to 1.2 million online people with InfoQ.com. And he has an 8,000 attendee annual via QCon conferences in San Francisco, New York, London, Beijing, Shanghai, and Sao Paulo. Floyd is an angel investor in over a dozen startups and has built teams and businesses in the US, Canada, China, Brazil, and Europe. Floyd is also a CEO activist for universal basic income, which is one of the main reasons why I have Floyd on the show today. Floyd, brother, welcome.
Great to be here on Ameer Approved, which, remember us talking about that a long time ago.
And I brought it, I didn't know if it was you or you, Jay. So it was you
I'm
who
pretty
came
sure
up.
it was me.
He's a full circle.
The context was health and wellness and red light therapies and all
everything,
this stuff.
Everything becomes Ameer approved. That's right. But let me ask you this, man. I know you for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, why UBI? There's a couple of things I want to go into this. Number one, why? But before we answer why, I'm pretty sure a lot of people out there have a lot of misconceptions of, well, what is it? You hear it all the time, UBI. But with the knowledge you've been doing and the initiatives that you've been putting forth in the last couple of years, if we can tell the audience from your definition, what's UBI to you?
All right. Well, there are 2 kinds of UBI. Well, basically, it is a monthly cash payment that goes from us to us via government, enough to cover basic needs, paid to the individual with unconditional. You can spend it on whatever you want. And generally people discuss it in terms of enough to cover basic needs. Maybe that's, I don't know, $1,500 a month. It's not living in luxury. It's not enough to, potentially it's enough to not work depending on how you live, but you'd have to be rooming with like 5 people. It's really enough to encourage more risk-taking. It's enough to eliminate a lot of nervous and anxious thoughts, enough to afford healthy food for your children, enough to afford basic necessities of life, to get that off the table so you can really pursue your potential in life beyond simply surviving. That's basically what it is. And there's basically 2 kinds of UBI. There's a lot of confusion on this. Andrew Coyne, who's a major editor at National Post, says one of the reasons why all kinds of people like UBI is because no one's agreed on what it is. So there's 2 kinds of UBI. There's one is the dividend approach, which Andrew Yang in the States is proposing, which I'm personally strongly in favor of, where everyone gets a consistent amount. You can see it as a dividend on economic growth, putting us all as shareholders in our economy, in our country, where we all participate in economic growth, particularly in the gains from technology and automation, which is displacing a lot of jobs. The other approach was popular in the late 60s, called a negative income tax, where the less you have, the more you get, and it maybe tapers off at around 60, 70,000 a year in earnings. And that approach was popular then as a way to end poverty, but not necessarily as a way to see ourselves as shareholders in the economy through a dividend approach. And so that's basically what a UBI is.
So the next question is, why do we need it?
Why do we need it? So right now, I'm seeing capitalism itself is moving in an unsustainable direction. Like the confluence of capital and labor is facing tensions it's never had before. So in the age of automation, in the age of the kind of technology that we have, the artificial intelligence we're developing, but also, frankly, the last 30 years of the onset of modern computing and robotics, we have seen a steady decline in the share of national income going to the bottom half of the population in most Western countries, particularly US, UK, and Canada. If that continues, where is that going to end? How is that going to end? If you look at one of those charts showing share of national income and just project those lines out another 10, 20 years, you can't call that a freedom capitalist system anymore. That becomes feudalism. That becomes a system where the top 1% could be earning 35 cents on every dollar, and the bottom 50 could be earning 6 cents on every dollar. That is a two-tiered system. That is like countries where I've started businesses in Brazil and China, and like where there's no middle class. So technology is displacing the middle class. It's been happening already for decades. We can see it already and the impacts of it. So to me, thinking of a dividend off economic gains, off the gains from technology, is one of the main reasons to implement UBI. Technology has created the middle class, and now it's destroying it. And this is happening. It happened in my own family. My father and uncle had jobs in Ontario's automotive manufacturing sector. And when China entered the scene in the early 2000s, they saw the industry contract by more than half. Like all the small tool shops my dad used to do business with, because he was a tool and die designer, like half of them remained. And the ones that remained were the ones that automated to stay competitive. And that's why actually automation is responsible for 6 times more job losses than global trade with China. So what happened to manufacturers with over 4 million people losing their jobs to automation in the United States and Canada over the last 20 years is about to happen to call center workers, retail workers, most of these major jobs. And what happens to people when their jobs are displaced? It's not that they lose their jobs. Job displacement means your category of work no longer exists. It's like you just get a job somewhere else. Like what you've been trained for, what you've been making money off for your whole life, you can't find that kind of work. So what usually happens is actually what happened in the United States, in those manufacturing states, is that half of those people did not go back to work, and half of those who did not, many of them ended up on disability insurance. They had nothing else to turn to. And the ones who did go back to work, the research shows that typically people whose jobs are displaced end up taking lower income work after that because they cannot find work at the same levels that they were at. And this is not an issue of retraining. When my dad was 55, what would he be retrained in? So he had to retire. Luckily, he had saved up enough. And my uncle became a superintendent in a rental building. Clearly a difference in pay scale from being working in manufacturing. So people need to understand that displacement is real. It's been happening for decades. We should be concerned about the displacement that's already happened, that has decimated places like Hamilton that have lost like their steel manufacturing. And this displacement today is happening at a scale that is unprecedented. So one thing it wasn't mentioned before I close this section is I led a group of 120 Canadian CEOs in October to sign a letter that endorsed basic income in Canada and saying that it's urgent. And one of the reasons it's urgent is technological automation. Another one is modern globalization, which is no longer about factories moving to China, but young people today are competing for just normal internet jobs around the world in a way that their parents or grandparents could never have imagined. Like you just go on Upwork, post a job for a podcast editor or a graphics artist or a copywriter or anything you want. And you can choose between the $5 an hour person or $10 max in Serbia, or you can choose the one in Canada for like $30, $40. Like that is the competition that people are being faced with today. I know a lot of solopreneurs, small businesses in Canada that are hiring virtual assistants in the Philippines on $4 an hour. So globalization has become hyper globalized now. The kind of pressures that our parents faced in manufacturing, like young people today are facing at a whole different scale. So what is the impact of that? A slow and steady decline in earnings potential, a slow and steady decline in the middle class. So much so that I saw a report that here in Ontario, the share of jobs that are low income in the last 20 years has doubled from 15% to 30%. Like those people didn't willingly want to take lower income jobs. Maybe that's all they could find. So we're already seeing decades of impacts of automation displacing jobs, which is why we're seeing this polarization of the economy, frankly, with no middle class. And then the last two major trends as to why UBI is winner takes all economics. Like almost every major industry vertical right now is starting to create monopolies of one or two major players. Amazon is soaking up, like vacuuming the economy pretty much, not even paying any federal tax, zero tax last year, while because of Amazon, 30% of malls in the United States are going to close. And here in Canada, we've seen like a number of retailers shut down, JCPenney, a whole bunch of others been publicized recently. So in a winner takes all economics environment, how do we make sure people are winners too? Like I think the dividend off economic gains is the way we make everyone a winner. If frankly, the way the system, the way technology works, it naturally lends itself, the internet lends itself to winner takes all economics. You can't fight that with regulations. You can't fight that with tariffs. So we may as well implement a system where the money flows back to everyone. So capitalism can be an emancipatory for everyone. And then the gig economy is another one where like people are in the net taking less and less of their earnings potential because more and more jobs are not full-time without benefits. So these are like urgent reasons for UBI. Now there's a whole bunch of positive reasons for UBI. I personally think that it is the natural evolution of capitalism towards more of a human-centered capitalism. So, you know, for instance, in the late 60s, it almost passed under Nixon. It lost by a couple of votes in the Senate because 2 Democrats, senators, thought it wasn't generous enough. Imagine if we had a UBI implemented since the late 60s, like all the suffering that would have been avoided, all the depravity that would have been avoided, like it just would have been such a different planet. It was popular. So Milton Friedman was for it. Friedrich Hayek were for it. These are heroes on the libertarian right, economists. Why? Because back when capitalism was in Cold War with communism, what moral high ground did we have? Well, we are a system of freedom. And these economists whose ideas shaped capitalism wanted to have capitalism end poverty because that is our moral high ground over communism. So imagine if we'd have done that. Imagine if we had a system where the economy itself is generating a dividend to end poverty and allow people to pursue their true potential in life and not be stuck in 3 dead-end jobs in order to feed their children. Like that is the potential of capitalism to meet its evolutionary potential, frankly, as a force for good, not only as a force to enrich a few at the expense of others.
Yeah. What were the hopes? What is the hopes of UBI? So let's say we turn it on tomorrow.
Yeah.
What does that give people?
It gives people long-term perspective. It gives people a chance to wake up in the morning, not feel the fear or the shame.
Or let's rewind back.
Yeah, sure.
What safety net does that give people? Does that give them ability to, I know for a fact that my rent is paid on a monthly basis. Like, what would you say, generally speaking, that money kind of gives people?
So you and I grew up reading all kind of financial literacy books,
Yes.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Cash Flow Quadrant, all these things, Robert Kiyosaki. And all these books, hundreds of books, have been written about the virtues of a passive income, the benefits of building a passive income you can rely on. This is nothing but a passive income for everyone. If you imagine that, if you get $1,000 a month, it's as if someone increased your net worth by $500,000 because that's the value of an annuity stream of $1,000 a month if you get at 18 for the rest of your life. So why is a passive income good? Well, again, it's less stress. It's the ability to make long-term plans. It's the ability to take risks, to pursue what you really want to do, you know, when you have the energy to do it. So look, when I was in my early 20s, I had some stock options paid off from a startup I was in, enough to buy myself an income generating rental property. I gave myself slightly more than a basic income. And because I had that peace of mind, because I had the absence of these kinds of financial fears. So the absence of fears is a feature that we have with UBI. It's not only about, you know, people having this positive view, I can take it, do what I want in life, but rather the absence of debilitating fears. I had that. And because of that, I was able to quit my job, pretty high paying job at the time, and start my business. If I did not have that risk tolerance addressed, because UBI fundamentally will increase everyone's risk tolerance, and risk tolerance is needed to launch businesses, to pursue passion projects, to do whatever people are called to do. They need risk tolerance. If I didn't have that income stream at the time, I probably would have eventually started the business anyway, but the timing would have been off. We would have been crushed by 2008. But because I had the risk tolerance at the time to start the business in 2006, we were able to start early enough to ride that wave. So I think UBI increases risk tolerance and decreases stressful thoughts and basically moves you up Maslow's hierarchy. Why can't we have a system that moves everyone up Maslow's hierarchy a few notches?
But to kind of rewind there, so I always look at the problem we're trying to address.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you're right. Automation has caused issues, global economy, simple supply and demand economics. When you have more people bidding for the same job, what happens? Price reduction.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Simple math. Also, you know, it all depends on which city you live in too. Toronto's pretty expensive for a global city, or at least in North America. What would you say though, if we're looking at this objectively speaking, like, and we can talk about it, Toronto, because you and I live here. Would you say, for example, the UBI fund that you get, or the dividend fund paycheck on a monthly basis, would that more or less go to support just having shelter over your head? Because I always look at like, okay, it might be a fact, objective fact, that you're not making enough money to survive where you're living. You know, some people 45K is not enough. Other people it is. Some people $300,000 a year is not enough. They want $2 million, whatever, right? It's all objective. So for me, it's like, okay, is it the fact that rent is too high? Is it the fact that just basic living is too high? You know, so what is that fundamental problem we're trying to address with UBI besides a mental, psychological safety net?
The urgent problem is giving people a transition from technology, from job displacement. That's the more urgent one.
Okay.
That's two, actually. There's two, actually, I would say is urgent. Is that, I mean, jobs are being displaced today. And a lot of it is hard to see because we're talking about a systematic rejigging of the whole economy to be globalized, and also all the automation that we were already seeing every week. So that's important. Second one is again, the system fundamentally is leaning towards more structural poverty, towards more structural people in working poverty. I heard something like 2/3 of people in poverty are working. Why is it that you were working and you're in poverty? So that is a structural market failure, at least the way the market's organized now, where there is nothing like a dividend, like a UBI. So this is not about welfare. It's not about a safety net. This is about raising the floor that we're all standing on so that the system itself is actually creating prosperity for everyone, not only for a few. So I see that structural working poverty is urgent. People right now are suffering. Their children are in situations where a lot of people can't afford healthy food. Even after the Canada Child Benefit, which we'll talk about later, still 1.4 million children are still in poverty. And a lot of their parents are working, right? So that's a problem with how the last 30 years since the golden age of capitalism, how things have shifted since the advent of robotics and computing. And then technological displacement. So those are the urgent problems to be solved. But I say, again, as an opportunity, the greatest thinkers in economics have been for a basic income, like for decades. So why not pursue our evolutionary potential as a system of where we can get to so we can end poverty, create an environment where everyone can pursue their potential in life, not be held back structurally. And I don't think I actually answered directly your question about Toronto, but yeah, I mean, first of all, if you have a consistent amount for everyone, it's almost incentivizing moving to smaller towns, which would certainly be good. That's a cash investment in rural parts of the world. And if you're in the city, again, it's not enough to afford a 1-bedroom apartment and do well. It's like if you room with 2 or 3 people or you have a family, you could probably get by in terms of basic food, clothing, basic rent. But again, with basic fears addressed, now what do you do with your life? Right. And that should be questions we're asking ourselves, not how do I eat tomorrow?
So I think in conjunction with like UBI, what form ever you take, there has to be some form of like also educational spearheading. Because regardless of if you get $500 or $5,000 a month, you still don't change the fact of like, I'm still in this job that doesn't pay me well, right? I don't have necessary skills, whether, you know, it's not like I hate when people say learn to code. It's like, listen, I know how to code. I fucking hate it.
I have a computer science degree and
I don't like to code.
Not everyone can code.
I just don't like to code.
Yeah.
I don't like to spend time on my computer coding. I just don't like it. So I find it hilarious when people say, hey, just learn to code. I'm like, yo, human beings are different, right? People have different interests. So I'm always interested from the knowledge aspect. It's like, cool, here's $1,000 for the rest of your life. You know, you can pay your rent. Cool. Gives you some type of like psychological safety net you can have. But besides that, the reality is you're still doing that job. You don't have the necessary skills to move up the hierarchical ladder. It would be interesting to see if we can have like a UBI plan in conjunction with some kind of new streamline, because I'm pretty sure everyone can agree on both sides of parties. Doesn't matter if you're left, right, up or down, that our educational system today is a complete sham. You know, student debt is ridiculous. $1.2 trillion in debt. You can't even claim bankruptcy on student debt.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And in the States, they take your social security away if you don't pay it back. So your pension's gone.
Yeah.
And that's slavery.
It's like modern
slavery.
It's like institutional insecurity.
Yeah. It's like, well, don't worry. You're going to go to the school. We're going to charge you, blah, 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 you know, whatever. And like, you're going to get a job. Reality, there's no job for what you're taking. It's backed by the government. It's crazy.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned education because there's an important distinction there. Because I've heard some funny critiques of UBI saying, oh, well, it doesn't solve people's life purpose or it doesn't solve education.
Yeah.
Well, like, yeah, that's like saying that that like doctors don't increase crop yields. No, doctors keep farmers healthy and the farmers increase the crop yields. Similarly, UBI keeps people healthy, keeps them mentally well, keeps them able to make long-term bets. And then what they do with that ability is up to them. Like, do you want government telling people what to learn? Do you want people to have the ability to have more risk tolerance and go and get an education? So I was observing a panel couple of years ago with people who were actually on Ontario's basic income assistance during when the experiment was running, and I was shocked actually. I think more than 4/5 of the panel said that they had already started like learning new things, and many of which had gone back to college because they knew they had a 3-year runway with that experiment, which then Doug Ford canceled just for ideological reasons, in my opinion. They all wanted to go back to school because, I mean, who doesn't want to better themselves? Like this whole thing that people were lazy staying home is completely unfounded. Like 105,000 people who are already in 16 basic income experiments in the last 50 years, there was no evidence of reduction of work. In fact, in cases of extreme poverty, there's more work because people could actually afford to get themselves out of a shitty situation. So people will have the ability to get an education. Now, how the government or how the private sector facilitates that's a whole different issue. But blaming the idea of UBI because it doesn't solve education life purpose is completely illogical.
I think it would be interesting to see like a hybrid version. I'm not a fan of government teaching anybody anything. I think the system's completely...
And it doesn't work either.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by Lambda's new model they have. I don't know if you've been paying attention.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You should explain it to
so Lambda's interesting. Like, it's still way too early to tell, right? They just started. But the whole idea, it's... and mind you, it's still in the STEM fields. So it's not for everything yet. But STEMs are high demand. So the biggest issue right now in North America and globally is like good devs. Front end, back end, full stack, junior, whatever. And the traditional way of learning to code is you can be autodidactic, like myself, learn yourself, takes time, whatever. You can join some of these boot camps. They range from like $3,000 up to $25,000 I've seen, right? Or you can go traditional schooling, maybe like a 2-year technical George Brown or something like that. So it's high demand, right? At the end of the day, the more experience you have working for companies, that's your portfolio. You have your GitHub or GitLab. It's like, here's my code, right? Code speaks for itself. That being said, a lot of people don't even have the opportunity. If say the bootcamp is a good option for some, they might not have $10K or $15K to go to the bootcamp. So what Lambda has done is like, okay, we will take the upfront capital cost and risk with you. So Floyd can apply. It's application only, right? They read a bunch of applications. They have different cohorts, right? They've engineered a certain way of teaching based on science, fast learning, getting the best mentors and teachers, etc. And so if Floyd gets accepted, I don't know, maybe the school is like become a full stack mean developer, let's say, right? So you go through that process, however long it is, maybe it's like 4 to 6 months. At the end of the tunnel, Lambda has teamed up with a lot of top tech companies. Let's say the FANGs, for example, right? And the FANGs are always looking for high quality developers, right? So Lambda has this evergreen pipeline directly for the FANG companies. And so for Floyd, there's no risk whatsoever. He's getting free education. He pretty much has a job guaranteed by Lambda. And so the catch-22 though is like, once Floyd does get hired by Google, let's say, percentage of Floyd's salary that he gets goes back to pay Lambda.
Yeah. So it's almost like deferring your upfront expense and paying for it later. I mean, we should triple down on that. Because even after UBI, it doesn't mean people have disposable income.
No.
But they'll have the most important thing, which is time and confidence to take those programs.
Yeah.
Without those two,
like honestly, for me, UBI, I think the biggest thing it solves is the rent. I think shelter is the biggest thing.
Like, and psychological well-being.
Yeah. Well, psychological for them is like, how do I pay mortgage or how do I pay rent? It's like, I won't have shelter for my family.
In the experiment in the 70s in Manitoba, where 5,000, I think a whole town got UBI for 5 years, there were 8% reduction in hospitalization visits during that period because people were less stressed.
Well, we've seen in studies that financial stress actually lowers IQ.
It does. I mean, behavioral economics research has shown that people in financially stressed situations make better short-term decisions, but poor long-term ones. And the reverse is true if you have not abundance, but if you're just not worried about money. So yeah, it's hard to, as Andrew Yang likes to say, it's hard to think about solving world peace or solving environmental challenges when you have an economic boot on your throat. So I even linked this to the environment. If people are afraid, they're going to fall prey to fear mongers. They're not going to vote for more progressive parties that have long-term solutions when they're being scared into like, oh, jobs. That's the only solution for the economy. The only solution for your prosperity because people are too afraid. Meanwhile, UBI is a path to more jobs because a study that came out last week that I had some part in organizing showed that the Canada Child Benefit, which is a basic income, actually contributes 500,000 jobs and $85 billion in business revenues.
To people who aren't from Canada, how does that how does that program work?
Okay, so I have a nonprofit that is advocating for UBI, but on economic grounds. So I think it's really important that we see that UBI is not only about poverty, it's about improving the economy for everyone. And so Canada actually has the largest national basic income, I think, in the world that no one's ever heard of or talked about. It's called the Canada Child Benefit. This is tax-free monthly cash that goes to 67% of all families. These are families who have people under 18 in the family dependents. 90% of all children in the whole country are in families receiving the CCB. And if you look at it from the lens, so $24 billion a year is paid out to Canadian families. And this research that was commissioned was sponsored by a few CEO friends of mine. And UBI Works kind of organized it with the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis. They did an impartial, like third-party research. We had no hands in the numbers. We just wanted someone to actually take a look at what was the contribution of the Canada Child Benefit. So we see it as a basic income because Andrew Yang talks about $1,000 a month, right? Did you know that 400,000 families in Canada are currently getting $1,000 a month or more through the Canada Child Benefit? 100,000 single mothers are currently getting $1,000 or more through the Canada Child Benefit. And over 1.1 million families are currently getting $600 a month tax-free versus like Finland, which had a few hundred people getting less than 600 euros a month. So like the biggest basic income in the world has already been running for 3 years here in Canada. And what have we seen? For the last 3 years, since the payments were expanded, since the Liberals were elected, we've seen like 3 years of improving unemployment rates to like record lows of 40 years. We've seen low inflation. We've seen economic growth. In fact, the governor of the Bank of Canada in 2018 said that that program, particularly as a cash stimulus, grew GDP by 0.5% in 2017.
Is this straight cash to get, or
just straight cash per month? So this is basic income, right?
And then who qualifies for this?
Depending on your income level, and
so the sliding scale.
You get a sliding scale based on on your income and how many children you have. So each per child, if you are absolutely poor, per child, if you're in absolutely poor circumstances, I think you get up to $580 a month per child, and then it tapers off all the way up to households of $150,000. So even middle class families are receiving it. In fact, so what this report did by the Canadian Centre of Economic Analysis is just look at what is the economic contribution of this program, and there were some very interesting findings. So because people who are under basic needs, or perhaps just basically treading water, like half the country, frankly, that can't afford $200 in case of an emergency. And in the US, it's $500. They can't afford that. Canada, it's $200. These people spend the money. So this goes back into the economy. So that economic stimulus has contributed 500,000 jobs, almost 500,000, 453,000 jobs equivalent. Because of that spending, businesses receive that money. They spend it again, downstream. There's multiple effects that happen from this cash stimulus. That's created $85 billion total in business revenues, and an estimated, I think it was like 13 or 14 billion in additional gross profits for businesses. So it's good for the economy. And in the net, that's been 46 billion a year that's added to Canada's GDP, which is like 2.1% or something of GDP because of a basic income that primarily helps people who don't have a lot of money. But so that's how it works. Like this is a cash stimulus. So I want people to understand that having a basic income is not only about poverty, it's about growing the economy and making the system work better. Because if people are in structural poverty, like who's going to buy businesses' products? Like we're in a situation right now where more businesses are closing than opening every year, and we need to stimulate demand. We need to ensure demand is at a certain level for the system itself to work well. That's why I see a basic income as a public utility. It's like roads, it's like water. You need to have the circulation in effect for the system to work well, for people to participate in their economy, for businesses to have more customers, for people to pursue their potential. And finally, another interesting finding from that study is that this is not only about helping lower income people, although it will do that, the middle class. So I heard of a family whose household income is $80,000 a year, and they decided to have a second child because they knew that with the Canada Child Benefit, they would get an extra $250 a month, and they could make ends meet. Because $80,000 a year, it's middle class, but depending on where you live, you might still be just treading water with that money, right?
Yeah, like in Toronto.
So imagine that, like a middle class family having an extra child, because of this ability that we provided each other through this CCB, and in the report show that all in all, $4,500 a year Like $4,500 a year more is now being received by middle class families, people over 50 grand a year in household income through the Canada Child Benefit. So this is good for the middle class. And without programs like this, I mean, this is the only countervailing force we have against technological disruption of the middle class. What else do we have?
More job creations.
Which is increasingly lower income work. And there have been several studies showing the impact of automation on the economy.
Yeah.
It is creating more lower income jobs than middle class jobs. So you can have all the retraining you want. You could triple down on Lambda when only 8% of all jobs being offered today are STEM.
There's a couple things in conjunction that would help UBI. Number one, we won't get into this podcast, but I talk about our monetary system is completely a mess.
I agree.
Like inflation every year, the Fed just printed $35 billion back into circulation and quantitative easing. So buying power decreases like 3.5, 4% per year. So the money you get, I always grab a piece of, I grab like a $20 bill here. I'm like, here you go. Rip every year. Rip, right? So it's like your purchasing power decreases. That's a whole different conversation. There's actually one tech that would help all of this above, like exponentially. Super cheap, fast public transportation.
Yeah, Hyperloop it up.
Whether it's some Hyperloop, which Canada desperately needs. Like I used to fly to Kelowna to see my wife before I moved out there. And this is Canada specifically. United States, it's cheap, really cheap to fly from like say New York to like Miami. For us, it's like ungodly expensive. It's actually cheaper for me to fly from Toronto to Berlin than to Toronto to Vancouver. And I'm not crossing any borders. So specifically for Canadians, if we can have a Hyperloop that goes, let's say 600, 700 kilometers an hour that can connect coast to coast, like Montreal to Vancouver, believe me, I'll be in Vancouver as much as I can. I love the West Coast, right? Instead of paying a $700 ticket to go, right? Or even, not even, that's one thing, but even creating more rural fast connections. Like whether it's like, there's areas I love just north of Toronto, like 2-3 hours. The fact is like traffic on the 400, I refuse to do it. I just don't want to do it, right? There's beautiful places just north of Toronto. So imagine having some kind of like quad helicopter service or like a mini Hyperloop or some monorail. Forget Hyperloop. Can we grab the Japanese monorail train that they have? But like if we can have fast, cheap technology combined with like, let's say $1,000 a month with the gig economy, why would I live in Toronto? Whereas rent's like $2,600 to $3,500 for like a 2-bedroom downtown, where I can decide to live 3 hours and my rent is, guess what? $1,000.
Well, I think Hyperloops for long distance travel and self-driving, basically quadcopter taxis for short distances. Yes. That's the future.
Yeah.
I mean, Hyperloops aren't yet proven, but the quadcopter stuff is not far off. And if it's self-driving.
Well, they're doing tests in Dubai. I know that one. Israel's doing something with that. And I was in Seoul, Korea last year, and they're going to be launching their version of Hyperloop soon. And it's not technically like Hyperloop like Elon Musk, but it's pretty similar.
Well, I mean, Hyperloop is just a maglev train in a vacuum
pretty
tube,
much.
Right?
That's it. People's like, oh, it must be crazy. I'm like, no, not really. You're just using physics,
Yeah, it's going to be great to live in small towns and like, take the quadcopter over to Toronto for a job. But it's not going to be affordable until it's self-driving, because if you have people driving those things, it's just it's too expensive.
So your approach to UBI, how are you approaching it? Because I know there's many different models out there. The one that you kind of want to roll out to Canada, how do you envision that? Yeah, so in first of all, the model, the negative income tax model, which is the one that was very popular in the late 60s, Andrew Croyan from the National Post said that to implement that would only cost a 3% GST increase. And you would basically end poverty for 3%. Like, what the heck? Why? We should have done it yesterday. What are we waiting for? Imagine the economic stimulus of like ending poverty and for what? Just a 3% GST increase? So that would be the first step. I mean, aspirationally, though, I believe that fundamentally we should move towards a flat dividend for everyone, so that we see it as, again, this is not about welfare. It's not about that stuff. This is about us being shareholders in the economy, so that the gains from technological gains, the wealth from all that is somehow being shared, so that it's emancipating everyone. Then we'll see capitalism reach its evolutionary potential. So, for example, John Maynard Keynes, the economist whose ideas created the golden age of capitalism, said that by now we should all be working 15 hours a week because of all the productivity gains that we would have had. Okay, so think about that. He never talked about how things are distributed to allow that to happen. He just said that it should be possible. It probably is possible.
But who can choose to do that if they don't have money, right? So like if the economy of the future continues on the trend it's on now, which is creating far more lower income jobs, jobs of service, jobs of personal care workers, technicians carting around AI doctors instead of doctors, or, you know, like if that's the jobs of the future, maybe you want to work 20 hours a week with your UBI and have a great life. So maybe this is the potential capitalism has. Now, I'm not advocating for people not working, and there's no evidence that people won't work. I'm talking about the future where there's going to be less and less middle class or high income jobs because of AI and automation. So the dividend approach sets things up so there's no stigma to receive this money. You're not an unworthy person, because no, we are all shareholders in the economy. We all get the same amount. And this is a dividend, a bounty off economic gains, because who owns technology? Like, who owns technological invention? I mean, the internet was created by government financing. Much of the inventions that have created the iPhone were scientific from academia, also government funded. So like much of like Zuckerberg didn't invent the internet. And he's a super billionaire. So if we imagine that who owns technology, if we see that technology is our shared inheritance, then the least we could do is have a dividend off of its gains, enough to end poverty and give people a chance to make more long-term visions and dreams of their life. And if we do that, we will be in a good place if the job apocalypse does come, which many experts and credible institutions have said it will come, with like half of all jobs being gone in the next 20, 30 years. If that happens, we'll be set up to actually benefit from that, because if that happens, things will also get a lot cheaper. Elon Musk says that everything will become much, much cheaper because of the exponential technologies under development now. So if this dividend is in place and things do get a lot cheaper, which a lot of things have been getting cheaper over the last 30 years, like vacuum cleaners cost how much before China entered the scene? You know, like modern manufacturing, like imagine the cost of an iPhone like 20 years ago if you tried to replicate that.
The curve might change though, because you had cheap labor, right? But then you have the Chinese upper middle class gaining, 100 million people have left poverty.
Yeah, well, that just improves the economy of scale for production. Things will still get even cheaper.
Potentially, if you can take the human element, like for example, a lot of people in the textile industry who were in China, like from the Guangzhou area, are even leaving because it's too expensive now than going to Vietnam.
Sure.
Right. So it's like China's actually becoming like middle class America bit by bit.
Yeah, actually, I had a funny story with that. I visited China and Tibet recently because I have a business there. I was visiting my partner, and we went to Tibet together. Mm-hmm. We had approval and all that, because you have to get approval to go in China. And I wanted to buy this hand painted thing, a Buddha hand painted thing, and I got one. I was like, this is great. Like, this must have been made by an artisan. I want to support the local community. And then we went to Nepal, the next part of our trip. And Nepal, I saw almost identical paintings. And like, I showed one of the storekeepers, hey, I bought this in Tibet. Like, how come yours is so similar? He's like, oh, because they outsource to us. We actually make them all. And they get sold in Tibet.
Of course.
Like, wow. So like Tibetans in China like are outsourcing to Nepal, where the labor is cheaper to create.
It's all about arbitrage.
Yeah.
All right, where can you arbitrage? Now, going back to the UBI, how does the welfare system fit into this? Are we planning to eliminate it? Because I'm pretty sure, once again, that's another topic. I think both left-leaning, right-leaning, doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum, everyone agrees that model's broken.
Yeah. Okay, so where you stand on that also has to do with where you tend to stand politically. So in general, most people agree that this should not replace all services, because if you have a disability, you need some extra money because you're on a disability.
Sure.
You might need some extra support. If you have a mental illness, you need some extra support. It's not like you're going to fire all the social workers. Like some people just need some help to get through what they get through, and some people need help permanently. That's the whole point of disability insurance, that we could all get hurt. It could happen to any of us, right? This is for all of us, right? But what everyone agrees on both sides of the spectrum is that this is better than things that are very similar to just pure welfare payments, because it takes away the bureaucracy, it takes away the stigma. You don't have to wait in line for someone to say if you're worthy of help. You don't have to prove what you did to be worthy of that help. Like, this is something that we all just get because we're alive. It's just like you have access to roads and drinking water. You have access to money for basic needs. So there's no more stigma in it. No one has to feel like a criminal because they can't work.
But what are modern day welfare? Like, for example, the reason why welfare is broken is incentive model is broken. So let's say you're like a struggling mother or father and you have one or two kids, right? And so there's the incentive is broken because it's like, okay, let's say if that individual makes X amount more, let's say 2K more than the threshold, he or she loses those benefits.
Right.
Why on earth then would that person work harder just to make the extra 2K when they're getting all these benefits?
Right. So let's talk about that. So it's a perverse incentive now. In fact, I've heard stories of people who they want to do black market work under the table because they don't want to lose their benefits, right?
Yeah, see?
So basic income actually encourages work because you keep the money you have. And in the two methods of basic income I mentioned, in the negative income tax method, you start to lose it slowly as your income grows.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still better off working. Like if maybe you have a job for like, you make 25,000 a year, maybe instead of having your full BI of like 18,000 a year, you only get an extra 10. So,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still better off with 10 more, right? Or in the dividend approach, very interesting. And Andrew Yang has been critiqued by people on the far left that, hey, why are you saying that you can choose $1,000 a month if you're better off than your current support systems? Well, an interesting point is that, okay, well, maybe $1,000 a month might be less than what someone might be getting now,
Yes.
but if they work, they lose everything they're getting, versus if they work and they can keep $1,000 a month, it encourages you to work.
Yes.
So the dividend approach fundamentally incentivizes work. And that's what people who think that people are lazy will stay at home, they're just wrong. Because like there's no evidence people don't work. From, again, 105,000 people were in clinical trials already. And who doesn't want more money? And if someone like absolutely just doesn't want to work for some reason, that's probably like such a small fraction of the population that to demonize this policy that would do so well for so many people, just because of that that's just like illogical.
Charlie Munger has a good saying, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. And so like,
yeah.
Ideally, we would then replace the modern welfare system with like a UBI system slowly.
Yeah. So again, both sides agree that replacing a lot of the system, at least the parts that are they're most similar to what the cash would do, is good. But then you have the extremes, that, like people extreme right, like Charles Murray, would do away with absolutely everything, and then people on extreme left. I mean, there's certain programs that they would maintain. I mean, nobody wants to end again funding for mental health. CAMH in Toronto, like what does that have to do with UBI, right? Like probably less people would go because they're less stressed. But we need to maintain support for disability. We need to maintain support for like certain interventions that are required by society. Now, I'm not an expert in these things, so I can't tell you which they are. But in general, there is agreement on all sides that yes, replacing things that are directly welfare would be done. So you'd have a reduction in government, reduction in headcount in government. Government's good at writing checks, and you would achieve that streamlining of government services. So it's actually smaller governments. So like another analogy like to offer is that yes, more money's running through government doesn't mean government's bigger. Like was WhatsApp a big company when it sold for like $19 billion? No, it only had 50 people in it. So even though half of 500,000, even though like almost 1 billion people were using WhatsApp, doesn't mean WhatsApp was a big company. It was a streamlined, small, efficient company. Same with government. If we have UBI, it's a smaller government, even though there's more cash running through it, but government's really good at writing checks.
Would this be a federally run program? This wouldn't go province to province?
Well, I ideally, it would be federal, but it depends. I mean, Canada's healthcare system initially was championed, I think it was in Manitoba, and then eventually other provinces wanted to adopt it, and then it was adopted federally. So there might be one smart, bold province that does it first, and then everyone else is going to see the economic gains from that. Like, shit, we should do this everywhere. What are we waiting for? I think if Canada does it first, I think the world will follow.
And so, because I know you're running a bunch of initiatives right now,
yeah,
to push this. In your mind, what would you say is the next initial steps that you need to take for this to actually become a reality?
Me personally, or like Canadians?
Yeah. No, you. You speak on behalf of you.
Yeah. So what I'm doing now is, like, I'm really grateful. Like my business is doing quite well. It's I have more time now in addition to that to work on this activism stuff. So, I mean, the unique take that I'm taking now is anything that pushes the economic narratives around it, because everyone understands the social narratives. We understand that people will be healthier. We understand that child success rates will improve, better graduation rates, less mental health improvements. Everyone knows those things, the impacts of poverty. The fact that solving poverty will actually save a lot of money for the government too, in terms of reduced crime, and in terms of there's a lot of things like that. Sorry. So my focus is making the case that it's also good for the economy, because if people understand that, I think it'll face less resistance in the federal 2024 elections and any provincial elections before that. So So the group that we're organizing is organizing like funding and organizing marketing and press PR and social media influencer campaigns around things that will push these economic narratives. So the first example was last week. I mentioned earlier, the Canadian Centre of Economic Analysis put out a paper about the economic impact of the Canada Child Benefit. So my team went to work with a social media campaign, like spreading that idea. We had an amazing video that summarized the key points. We made resources available for the press to ask questions. So we have ideas to do more things like that. Last year we launched the CEOs for basic income, again, to provide the people to actually show Canadians that in fact there is business support for this. Because if all they hear from is special interest groups saying like low tax, low tax, low tax, they think that's what the business community wants. No, that's what special interest groups whose mandate is that will say. So I want to show that in fact, in my own experience, like there's overwhelming support in the business community for basic income. Like all the private founder people that we hang out with, like 4/5 of them immediately said they'd sign the letter because they want to see a Canada without poverty. They want to see like us have UBI. So I just organized a letter to get 120 CEOs to sign it. And there it is. It's online right now, CEOs for basic income.ca. So we'll be doing more with that group, trying to expand it out, maybe get to 300 CEOs, maybe get to 1,000. So I'm personally focused on, again, more campaigns that will make people understand that basic income is not about welfare. It's not only about ending poverty. It's about evolving our economic system to its potential.
And so how would this be voted in? Does it have to be like a full federal vote for something like this to go through?
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason Andrew Yang is done more than probably anyone else in the world to spread the idea is simply that he's running. So there's someone running that you can vote for and have it tomorrow if you believe in it. So he has to convince people that this is a good idea.
But the Senate has to all vote in favor of, right?
Yeah. But, if a president gets a huge majority mandate, I mean, it would be very dangerous politically for even minority parties to stand against that. So hopefully he wins by a landslide, or if he doesn't, hopefully he's sparked a whole generation to understand that what automation is doing, so that maybe 6 years from now or the next election, someone will run on it again. Maybe he'll run it again. He's only 44 years old, right? So, yeah. So here in Canada, I think, yes, Canadians have to. So the parties right now are a bit squeamish about running on it today because they don't think there's enough support for it, because people legitimately don't understand it. A lot of people just don't even know what it is. They think it's welfare. They don't know it's good for the economy. So I think that Canada has its best chance to get this passed in the federal 2024 election, if several parties are running on it, like promising it, or maybe a few provincial elections that come before that. So by that time, we'll see self-driving trucks on the road. We'll see self-driving cars. People will be scared. And then they're going to remember things Andrew Yang has been saying and things that my group's been putting out. And then they'll have a real chance. So I'm doing everything I can to create the conditions of public awareness so that, in 4 or 5 years, the parties aren't afraid to run in it. And because they know there's public support. It does have to be done through government. I do support the various crypto approaches to it. However, I think the fastest way to get it is to vote it in. And I think, again, like once we see those self-driving trucks on the road, people are going to understand it. If they didn't understand it until then, they'll understand it now. And I think we'll have a real chance.
Yeah, I was a fan of I read this paper, I mentioned this to you before, I was a fan of the UBI dividend fund model, but legitimately an actual fund.
Yeah.
Where you would allocate funds. So let's say we take the broken model of welfare. So we won't touch disability, we won't touch, mental, that's all fine. But like the bad incentive one, where it's like if you make 2K more, you lose everything. Like,
yeah,
exactly. Remove that. That's garbage. Doesn't help anybody. So you allocate a bunch of funds. So you look at it from like purely objective data. It's like what really works, what doesn't work, and allocate that data, allocate that money to the fund. Then we would have a fiduciary, non-government employee, very important. Like any good fiduciary, this person's responsibility is IRR, internal rate of return. So these are our tax money in this, we can call it like the sovereign citizen fund, right?
Yeah.
But the thesis of the fund, or the modus operandi, is this, though. Number one, it needs to invest locally. So it's a federal fund, so locally means Canada. So you invest in businesses in Canada, infrastructure in Canada, etc. So that's base layer. Second layer, like any good fund, because you're looking for internal rate of return, is like where else can we deploy the money? Then maybe we do some like indexes and ETFs, you know, kind of like safe havens, maybe some REITs, whatever. You know, I'm not a fund manager. And then the third layer on that is like, okay, where else can you get returns? Global investments, right? But base is Canada first. And like any good fund, like if you and I we have our money in a good like private equity fund or some type of fund, there's a return for us as capital providers. And so for me, I look at this as like a very interesting stimulus because on one hand, you have a performance-based type of fund. Number two, the money can circulate back into like startups and local businesses. And it kind of like makes it fun. It gamifies it. Like you as a citizen, be like, oh, cool. Like here's a fun, like you actually know where the money's kind of be. I would love to have like a UI UX. I go into app and like, you know what I mean? Like realistically, I'd love to know that. One thing that irritates me about the government the most is the fact it's a black box. I think if the government really wants to, if whoever runs on this would actually get votes, we need to make it more transparent, you know? Like they're one of the reasons why I don't like taxes. It's not transparent to me. Yeah. I have no idea where the money goes. And for me, I'm all about efficiencies. If I know for a fact that the dollar you're taking from me is actually going to that construction company there and actually there's making a difference and that road is getting paved through sales tax, if I can see that, let's do it, you know? But right now, whether it's sales tax, income tax, business, whatever tax, you name it, I have no idea how that money is being deployed.
Yeah. I mean, government's stuck in the 80s in terms of technology.
It's crazy,
Why don't we have an app right now?
Like, imagine a beautiful UI, UX app. We're like, okay, this quarter, the government has collected X amount of taxes. It's being allocated to this. These are the people. And government needs accountability. I was talking with my buddy John, who was on the show a couple episodes ago. It's like one thing to make the government more efficient, and we can change the rules today, is people need to be able to get fired. It's almost impossible to get fired. I was reading a cool, I want to say cool. It's an interesting case study where they caught the guy twice on, I think, Pornhub, right? Goes to his union rep, talks about it, does non-efficient. Like this guy just, government job, let me check some porn, you know what I mean? Like this, and you can't get fired. And so for me, it's like, let's create systems that have proper incentives, right? I want the best people in government. I want minimum government, most efficient government. I don't want bloated. I don't want like, oh, we got to hire 10,000 more people. Why do we need more human beings? We need less human beings in there, but we need more efficiencies. So it'll be fascinating in the future if we can actually streamline that process where it's like, it's more tech oriented, where you get your $1,000 a month, you know, you can see where the money is being allocated for the government. And I don't know, that's at least my dream, but maybe my dream's too big for that.
I think it's very realistic.
You think so?
More techno savvy government to come in.
Yeah.
And I had a good idea. I think Andrew Yang said it, that on your annual tax day should be a holiday. On the holiday, it should be like I don't know, like some kind of videos coming off the government saying, thank you for your tax dollars. Here's what's being spent. It's like you contributed to this and to that.
But the tax system needs to change.
And but they could do it like China, for instance, has incredible amounts of transparency. China, there's an app that you can go in and see who owns any company, in the whole country, and like you can like click in recursively and find out who owns those shell companies and like play with it.
China's interesting. Also,
completely transparent.
You got to be careful what you say in China and what you do. You know, that's a whole different topic. But we're going with this. Oh, the transparency stuff. Ideally, though, you know, hopefully that changes. But the taxes. So the thing with the taxes, though, and I know we're going to be off topic, but it relates to UBI, is they need to figure out how to simplify it for people.
Actually, so I'm really in favor of, and I plan to work with some people to do some proper projections for this.
Yeah,
is UBI a flat dividend so we call it UBI fit. So a flat dividend with a flat income tax.
A flat dividend with a flat income. So everyone gets a flat.
So everyone starts off at, let's say, I don't know, I'm making this up. Everyone starts off at $20,000 a year.
Okay.
And on top of that, every dollar you earn through earned income is taxed at maybe 35%, even your first dollar.
Okay.
Because you're not poor anymore. And, you know, and everyone has the same access, the same floor to stand on. So there's a
35% flat income tax.
Yeah, and then you'd have to increase the GST, which frankly is important, I think, in a modern economy.
Okay.
The GST is a value-added tax, and in Canada, it's like half that of it in Europe. So we're in a globalized environment. We're globalized multinationals. are paying very little tax while disrupting industries here that Canadian companies will be paying more in tax. And the only way to reclaim that money is through increasing the GST and putting that back in Canadians' pockets.
Why don't we just reduce income tax if I need more money?
Well, it would be a reduction. If it's
35% if I'm making 100K plus, it's a reduction.
Or maybe 40% max or something like that.
Yeah.
I think we should be looking at again, capital is displacing labor. Like Thomas Piketty
I think there should
that.
be no income tax. I think the labor that you earn, because I'm sweating, I'm bleeding, I'm sweating, I'm working. This is my labor. Yeah. My labor is my wage.
Well, that sounds great. If we find if society comes to see alternate methods of funding that, I frankly think, again,
consumption tax,
the capital is displacing
sales tax.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, assuming people have enough money to afford to buy things.
And above all, going back to what I spoke about, above all, accountability with money within the government. It has to happen. Because no matter what rewind 10 years. What are we talking about? We need to raise taxes. We need more money. Okay, rewind 10 years from now. Same story. Okay, let's come present day. Let's go fast forward 10 years from now. What's the talking points? Well, we need more money. Why do we always need more money? Why? Where's the money going? Who's responsible for the money?
I think our taxes are lower now than they were 10 years ago. So
not income tax. Income tax is the same.
Well, certain taxes. I mean, like small business, corporate taxes.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the regular people. Who's small business? Like I'm talking about like the 98% of people.
Well, if you consider some of the tax rebates regular people are getting, they're far better off than before. Like there's a GST rebate. There's the carbon dividend.
Yeah.
There's the Canada Child Benefit. So like people in the lower thirds of income earnings are better off than they were 10, 15 years ago. So a tax rebate is tax relief.
Mm-hmm.
You may pay up front, but you get it back after. So it's lower tax overall.
Maybe.
And a basic income is a form of a tax rebate. It is tax relief. It just comes to you. You pay out, but you get some back.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is, more, I always believed, this is fundamental to my being, that transparency fixes everything. So I think the more transparency, the better.
So we need to make a new party in Canada called like the tech, I don't know, the tech party. I don't know.
It's the Green Party.
No.
I think they're for everything you've been saying.
Yeah, but their marketing's not working. You need a brand new party. You need something where it's like super young people.
Well, the Internet Pirate Party.
Yeah, something like that, you know.
Well, there's an interesting movement called Liquid Democracy.
Yeah.
It's the idea that candidates would run promising to do whatever their local population has voted for through like direct democracy means, like having apps where you could vote on the issues that you care about, and your candidate promises to represent you, although he has the right to veto it if he feels like it.
Yeah, but they have this model. It's very similar to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and yeah. So I'm a firm believer in minimizing nation states, not for secure. So Switzerland model is interesting. The problem with massive nation states like Canada and United States is not the fact of the nation states, the fact is no checks and balances. That's the problem, right? So it's like one dictator does it all. It doesn't matter if it's left party, right party. Doesn't matter. It's one party, as Noam Chomsky said. The party's in power. That's his words on play. Basically, in Switzerland, you have the canton system. So you have a central government, then you have canton in different cities, right? Each canton has the option of setting their tax policies or any policies per se. And so each canton then has to compete with the other cantons. You don't want to have foolish policies, and person's like, well, why would I want to live here? I can go live there. So they have to play checks and balances. Number two, they have veto power over the central government. In case the central government passes some erroneous, stupid law, they're like, well, no, this doesn't help us, right? So like, I would love to see where in Canada we have that, where it's like, okay, the federal government's responsible for private property, the protection of its citizens, and national security, and other like,
I would say, and also
infrastructure.
And a UBI is infrastructure. It is a public utility, because structural poverty is a failing of the system, and it's getting worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
So implementing this circulation of funds, I see as a public utility, as important as roads, as important as electricity, something the economy needs to function well, especially in a winner-takes-all economic system. So if the federal government also just does that, ensures that all citizens can participate in their economy, I would put that in the same category as public defense.
We have to be really careful of who we hire to run this and within the government. We definitely don't want to hire the same people running the modern day welfare program. Well,
again, it's not welfare, right?
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with it. You still need people to understand how to help people get out of a bad situation whatever it is, mental health or disability, you need those departments because any of us could fall into that. You never know, you get hit by a bus, right? But what we don't want is this like what's it called, the industries of misery, like food banks and all these government employees or NGOs that profit off of poverty.
Oh, NGOs!
We don't need to profit off poverty.
Don't get me started with NGOs.
You just end poverty.
Exactly.
That's why Martin Luther King was like, towards the end of his life, like this might even be connected to his assassination, unfortunately, but he started to organize poor people's campaigns in the 60s, late 60s, pressuring the government with marches and planning a march that we should have a guaranteed minimum income in the United States for all ethnicities. It wasn't something only for Black Americans. So he decided, I'm going to make the rest of my life about that. And shortly after he was assassinated, and then without that pressure on Nixon, eventually the whole thing just kind of fizzled out. But imagine if he was not assassinated. Imagine if he had kept up with that, we'd have had a basic income by now, like for sure.
It's fascinating, man. You know, it's interesting times we live in. I think there's going to be a lot of turmoil happening.
I just hope that there's not too much blood before people wake up of what technology's been doing. It's you know, they say that if you put a frog in water that slowly starts to boil, that's how things have been economically since the mid 70s. There was a time during what's called the golden age of capitalism when wages were growing like almost 3% a year after year.
Was it still pre-1970s?
Yeah, but before the mid 70s, before computing.
Gold standard, bro, the dollar.
I think it's actually technology. Like before
technology too, yeah.
So you had people who with jobs were participating in the growth of the economy because and
well, there's a couple of reasons. Okay, so 60, 70, 80, those 3 decades.
Yeah.
10. There's fundamental couple of things that contributed to what's happening today. Number one, technology, yes, right? More or less eliminating the human need to do something, right?
Right, which before what's called the great decoupling, when wage growth and productivity growth used to go together.
Yes.
Before the mid 70s, they stopped. Wages stopped growing. Productivity went up.
Yes.
Before the great decoupling, that's before computing, mainframe computers were common, before the personal computer, before modern robotics. So there was a time when you actually needed people to create all the stuff that technology was creating.
So
and then you didn't after
You needed people. Number two, we had the gold standards. There wasn't quantitative easing. The buying power of the American dollar was strong. You didn't have all this ridiculous financial engineering that you see today through all these different means. That's a whole different. I'm going to bring a whole team of people to talk about this soon. Right, we're all going to talk about the Federal Reserve and how our monetary system is broken. So we had that issue. Next issue that you touched earlier is more and more global trade, global opening, right? What happens with global opening? You have a global workforce, right? Next thing is interesting, though, is you have the advent of birth control, right?
And globalization is also a technological thing. Like
correct.
You couldn't make iPhones across 50 countries without emails and computing.
It's all technology.
Yeah.
Right. So I was going to mention birth control. That's technology.
Yeah.
So then you have the empowerment of feminist movement, right? You have women now for the first time in history have a device, a technology that can say, I don't want to have a child. So now you have all these ingredients in this boiling pot.
Which, by the way, we're about to face a population collapse.
I agree with the population
in many countries around the world.
Yeah. There's multitude reasons for the population collapse. There's like one, cost of having a family is a major one. Number two, the deconstruction of a nuclear family or the idea, the myth of a nuclear family is being pounded on is like, anyways, I definitely want to have a podcast with somebody talking about that. Is like, to me, that's one of the biggest threats is actually people talk about human overgrowth. It's the actually opposite. I'll give you an example. Bill Gates has the Bill and Melinda Foundation, vaccines, right? And he talks about this, but one of the biggest threats facing human existence is a superbug, a viral bug.
Yeah.
We're long overdue, statistically speaking. And so some basic numbers they ran on simulations is within the next 10 to 15 years, there's a probability of a superbug happening out there. And within 365 days, so 1 year, that superbug, and this is low-end conservative estimations, would kill about 35 million people globally. Low-end. High-end making me even be like 300, 400 million people dead. And so for us, it's like, that's just one bug. It can be a multitude of different viruses out there. And so we have now, like, you have places like Japan, negative birth rate. They're trying to pay for you to have kids. Quebec is the same thing. So many places around the world.
Well, the Canada Child Benefit is helping that here.
Right. No one's having kids.
And and actually in China, I heard that for a country of 1.2 billion, they're only generating 18 million new babies a year.
I know.
Like now, that's like they're scared.
I know.
Like what's gonna happen? So like, and the funny thing is, like, Canada is actually very well positioned to potentially capitalize on this because we're pro-immigration in general. So we need more people to come in,
we do need
work
more
jobs
people,
to pay for the pensions and UBIs for all the existing citizens as the population shrinks. And people want to come here, and it's a very safe and friendly country. So we're actually demographically positioned well on this, assuming we can.
It's the weather, man. If we had warmer weather, more people would come.
That's changing too, unfortunately, with the global warming.
I don't know, man. Last year, Toronto was so... I'm like, come on, global warming to Toronto. I want some tropical trees over here.
Yeah. So, yeah, interestingly... anyway, so I was going to... forget it.
So what else? Anything else that people need to know about UBI or how they can help or...
follow UBI Works on Facebook and Twitter. Follow Basic Income Canada Network on UBI on those platforms.
And you have a bunch of resources and papers there people can read.
UBIworks.ca is where you can learn about the economic forecast paper. We'll be doing more things, but honestly, just have an open mind and tell people that it's good for the economy. I think we can have it, and that's at this point. I mean, we just need to raise public awareness of these things. I think that's the best we can do. If you're in the United States, Google Andrew Yang, vote for him. Do whatever you can to help him. He's the best chance America has, I think, to quickly put in these solutions to these major root cause problems. He wants to give you $1,000 a month to everyone, and I think that's amazing that someone like that is running.
Floyd, always a pleasure, brother. Thanks for
very
coming
much
on. Yeah.
All right.